I am out in the pasture with my buddy of 30 years, Sassy, recording this because we're in a pasture in Florida where we probably would not be if I had not gotten fired from my job at the Washington State Department of Natural Resources. I got fired because I refused to stop interviewing people, mostly doctors and scientists, who my bosses said were undermining their vaccine mandate. And one of those videos, in fact, the video that they saw after YouTube ripped it offline for, they called it medical misinformation, then later reinstated it. But one of those videos is headed to the Supreme Court in Missouri v. Biden, which many of you have probably heard of. It's this landmark free speech case that has been argued back and forth. And now, after the Fifth Circuit ruled in favor of the plaintiffs, who basically have argued that the Biden administration was pressuring the big tech companies to censor speech, violating First Amendment rights of the plaintiffs, Dr. Aaron Kheriaty, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, both of whom have been on the show. But Dr. Kheriaty was the one I interviewed in 2021, almost exactly to the day 2 years ago, who was suing the University of California. He was the medical ethics director at UC Irvine Health. And he was suing over their vaccine mandate, saying he had already had COVID and he was citing his natural immunity. That's it. That's how groundbreaking that conversation was 2 years ago, that YouTube had to rip that offline. A medical ethics director talking about the ethics of vaccine mandates and simply saying that he had already had COVID before and shouldn't be forced to get the vaccine. That is how radical that was. All right, let's just keep in mind 2 years later. They rip it offline. The only way that those of us who have had our videos taken down can fight back is we go on Twitter and we say, hey, YouTube, you did this. And then all of our buddies retweet it and we finally get YouTube's attention, a real person. And then this time, not always, but this time they apologized and said, oh, so it was just an error, and they reinstated the video. But my bosses at the Department of Natural Resources saw that tweet, and even though they knew I had a podcast, they hired me knowing I had a podcast. They were plenty fine with it. In fact, they had wished that I had promoted them on the podcast, but I didn't. I kept the jobs very separate. You know, I did the podcast like own personal time, own personal equipment, never talked about the job, never cross-pollinated, because I never wanted to have to deal with any ethical issues. And still, they said that even though it was my own time, you know, my own personal stuff and everything, my own personal social media, I was not allowed to interview anyone who would undermine their vaccine mandate if I wanted to keep my job. Well, I refused to comply with that, and the government actually kept its word. They fired me. And I never even thought at the time that that video that they saw, I mean, there were several others they cited, like interviewing Dr. Molly James, an ICU doctor who quit, and I think also was terminated for refusing to comply with the vaccine mandates at her hospitals. You know, there were other people, but those were the two I remember specifically. Definitely Dr. Kheriaty. Peter Goat was reminding me, actually no, because he wasn't even alive then, that Kheriaty then joins this lawsuit, Missouri v. Biden, and one of the points of censorship, of constitutional rights violations that's in his part of the case, is that video, that initial interview that he did with me that got ripped off of YouTube for medical misinformation. Again, you know, saying that basically these community guidelines were at least in part put there due to pressure from the government to not allow doctors like Dr. Kheriaty to speak. The reason I had Dr. Kheriaty on is because I was just interested in hearing what these dissenters were saying. I mean, that was what journalism I thought was about, was find the people that were saying something different. And he was somebody who was saying something different. You know, always on the news, we were hearing about how we needed these shots, and hearing about the mandates, and the newsrooms themselves were having mandates, and so they were not really reporting about them critically, and they weren't reporting critically about the shots themselves. And I was just fascinated personally about these doctors who were saying something different, because a lot of the doctors, if not the majority of the doctors I was hearing from, you know, in the corporate press or the establishment press were saying the total opposite. So like that was just interesting to me. It wasn't even trying to like prove a point or anything. I was just interested in. Then it got even more interesting when they were getting ripped offline, when we weren't allowed to hear what they were saying. And so then as a former TV news journalist, I just thought like, well, I'll give these people a chance to talk. I'll give them a chance to talk and let's just see what they have to say. Again, when I interviewed Dr. Kheriaty, I wasn't sitting there thinking like, this is going to go to the Supreme Court. I was just thinking this is an interesting guy that I'd like to hear from. Nobody had really heard of him back then. I found out about him from an article I read, so it's not like he hadn't done any press. But now, I mean, that name is everywhere. A lot of people, you've probably heard of Dr. Kheriaty. He's been on some big news shows. Matt Taibbi just interviewed him, and thanks to Matt for linking to my videos with Dr. Kheriaty and the video about my termination from the Department of Natural Resources. Thank you to Matt Taibbi for including me in that. But really 2 years ago, like, it was just another doctor, and it was just another interview, and our daughter, who we call the producer, she was little over a year, and you know, helping out in the background like those producers do now. And now we have a second producer, and that's it. I didn't know that it was going to get taken down from YouTube. I didn't know that it was going to end up leading to my losing my job. And I certainly didn't know that it was going to be part of this historic case, which, like, it appears it's going to the Supreme Court now because the Biden administration's lawyers have filed a stay, which, as far as I understand, like, now then that's going to be appealed. It just basically neither side is going to give up. Neither side is going to like get over this or give up until this goes to the highest court. Daddy Cow is settled in for the rest of the story, and Mommy Cow is glued to the screen. So let's get back to it. The reason that I did not comply with my boss's demand that I quit these interviews is because I worked for the government at the time, and what they were essentially saying to me was that in my personal time, I could not publicly associate with certain people or express certain opinions. And I felt like at the time, and still do, that was a violation of my First Amendment rights. And I told them that. Interestingly, my old boss, Hillary Franz, the head of the Department of Natural Resources, is now also running for governor of Washington State. She's one of the front-runner Democrat candidates for governor of Washington State, as Dr. Aaron Kheriaty is now part of this historic lawsuit, which includes my interview with him. So this video is just to say, like, wow, that's actually happening. You know, there are these little moments in life that we can participate in that just all of a sudden become this. And it's crazy to think about. Freckles keeps chasing Sassy away, so it's been very difficult for me to keep her in the background. Freckles thinks he's been around for 30 years. Anyway, so just the long and the short of it is I just figured I'd do a video about how that is happening. And then also I wanted to just say, like, looking back on it, it's changed a lot. It changed my life. 2 years ago, I was you know, fully employed with benefits and a pension and salary. And it was a good job. I was able to work from home, and you know, my daughter could come along at the time. She could come along with me to help out with like press conferences and stuff. And I really loved working with the firefighters. The whole job was focused on wildland firefighting, really, because they're the wildland firefighting agency in the state. And so I got to meet a lot of really brave firefighters, learn about the work that they're doing. The same people that I interviewed for my videos about those fires saved our home. And so I was really grateful to be a part of telling their stories. And then boom, now I don't have the health insurance for our family anymore that we were getting for the kids and me. Lynn has VA. I laugh because it's hard sometimes to call that a benefit because we all know what dealing with the VA is like. But anyway, that's another rabbit hole I'm not going to go down in this video. So that said, it changed a lot. And now we live in Florida, like the total opposite corner of the United States. This is where I grew up. It's great to be closer to friends and family. It's a lot hotter here. But like we have 10 acres and we've just fenced off a huge portion for a garden. We bought some fruit trees. We have cows now, horses and goats. And gardening is now like a real interest of mine. I have a whole nother channel now, if you don't know about it, about our off-gridish living and just getting into just being people who learn just basic skills to like feed ourselves, and how fulfilling that is to just be at home with the kids and like work in the garden, and hopefully the goats will finally get to it and have babies, and then we'll get milk. We'll see. I don't know. They're definitely the odd couple. Who knows what we're gonna do with the cows? We castrated the bulls, so we're not getting any babies from them. So that's it. So it changed a lot, and I guess my big takeaway is, well, there's kind of two. One is that like you just never know. You know, you just never know what's gonna be that thing, and like if you're doing something like it's just an everyday thing, and then it just becomes something that changes your life. And so I guess it's like just approach everything knowing that God can use anything. So approach everything as if God can use anything, and that God can use anything for good and will. I have no regrets. I would do it all over again. In fact, I think about like what it was like back then. It really wasn't a choice. I mean, I know that I could have chosen to just stop the interviews and keep my job, but I couldn't really have chosen in the same way that if you told me to just live in a swimming pool underwater, I couldn't do it. I knew the second that they called me, you know, and I was on the phone with them and knew what was happening, like I knew that my answer to them, even though I said I needed some time to think about it, I just needed the time to think about what I was going to say. But I knew that my answer was going to be, no, I'm not going to comply with that, and I'm going to continue my work. But I know, yeah, it's a choice, but it really wasn't. I really couldn't have chosen otherwise. And so that's my first thing. And then the second is just I posted a photo of myself on a birthday hike back then. I was turning 39, and no, I was turning 40. 40, sorry, I was turning 40. I just turned 42. I was turning 40, and I posted a picture of myself on top of this mountain. We'd gone on a hike for my birthday, and I put the verse, I think it's Matthew. Jesus says, what profits a man to gain the world and lose his soul? What does it profit a man to gain the world and lose his soul? I mean, it's a rhetorical question. It doesn't. And we've all, those of us who have kind of been down this road over the last couple of years, have seen the cost. But there is no profit in losing your soul. There is no profit. This is the beginning of our little garden. We got some corn here and the squash and melon over there. And who knows what the future will bring. If the podcast stays or takes kind of a backseat to the homesteading channel, or we just become professional farmers or just like hobby farmers that go to markets or whatever. There's a market near us that only has, from what I understand, one guy who sells produce, and it's conventionally raised. So it seems like there's a market for organic food. So maybe we end up doing that. Who knows? But I have no regrets. Anyway, back with Sassy and the cows and the goats, and of course Freckles, who's going to chase us all out of the way again. Just have to show how cute the goats are, by the way. There's Peter goat, our Billy goat, and Heidi goat, who hopefully they will make us some baby goats, and then mommy and daddy cow. And then, like I said, there's Freckles chasing Sassy, because he always does that. Like I said, I wouldn't do anything differently. I think this has really taught me to just try to live in the present. Don't get too far ahead, and don't get too far back, or back at all, or ahead at all. The only thing we really have is right now. And if we worry about all these things, well, what if this or what if that, or we have all these regrets, oh, I wish I'd done this or done that, we're not living like in the present, where history is really made, you know, where God lives. And so that's been, I think, probably the key part of my journey over the last couple of years is learning to be present, to be present and aware, because like I said at the beginning of the video, you never know. You never know what that moment could be. That one thing you do that you've done every day before that turns out to be the video that's part of a Supreme Court case. So thanks everybody. Thanks for supporting the work and coming along for the ride. Don't forget to celebrate with some AllisonWinePromo.com, my extremist, high-altitude wines from Argentina. And you can even mix them with my new sponsor, Field of Greens Organic Superfood Powder. The wine comes from very remote regions of Argentina. It is my favorite wine. These are amazing Malbecs. And you get 50% off the wine itself and 50% off shipping if you use promo code Allison at fieldofgreens.com. Allison with 1 L, you get 15% off your first order. These are all whole fruits and vegetables ground up after being flash frozen and chosen for specific immune and organ function. So it's great stuff to just add to a glass of water or a smoothie and get your fruits and vegetables for the day if your garden's not up and running or heading into winter. And like I said, you can mix it with the wine if you want, or you can mix it with something that probably tastes better. Plus, there's all kinds of other affiliate links, like Green Pasture here. They make my cod liver butter oil blend I take. It's high vitamin D, great for your teeth. Thanks for all the support, everybody. Cheers.